George Whitefield once said, "If you're going to walk with Jesus Christ, you're going to be opposed." In our days, to become a Christian is really to become a scandal. Now you may be asking, what does a quote from a guy with white hair, wearing clothes that are extremely outdated and from the 17th century have to do with me today? Well, I would expound upon that question and ask, what does the persecution of Christians, which is precisely what he's talking about here, what does that have to do with us today? My purpose today is not to give you an all-encompassing history of the persecution of the Christian church. Rather, my purpose today is to give you a condensed history of why it matters to us even today. I think the problem in America today lies in the fact that we're asking, why does this matter to me? The fact that there's a disconnect between the church yesterday and the church today. But I would argue that to truly understand the church of yesterday, we have to understand the church today. Or to truly understand the church of today, we have to understand the church of yesterday. But in America today, I would argue that this has resulted in a distorted view of God. So we have to understand Christian persecution, in that it helps us better evaluate our own faith. Thirdly, we have to understand the persecution of Christian faith because it allows us to appreciate why we live in a free country where we're able to worship and believe or not believe as we so choose. So why is this problem relevant today? Like I said, it helps us understand the church today. It allows us to analyze our own faith, and it instills in us an increased sense of patriotism. So the beginning. The beginning of the Christian persecution can be traced back to the deacon Stephen, and this is recorded in the book of Acts, chapter 7, if you're familiar with that story. This, in church history, this is the first instance of a Christian being persecuted for faith until death. But what this did, essentially, was it set a foundation for future persecutions that the church would eventually follow for centuries. But what also came out of this was, as we know, the Apostle Paul, originally he was Saul, and this gave way to his massive persecution against the church or the followers of the way. Secondly, I think we have to understand with Stephen is that at this time, this was illegal under Roman law. So the ones who actually authorized this persecution were not authorized to do so. They didn't have the jurisdiction to do this, but they chose to do it. What this did, this set off a domino effect that led to a persecution that would follow for centuries and centuries. So for us, the relevance to us today that I would pull out of this is I would ask, are we willing to do the same for our faith? Secondly, what this did was it started a revolution. From the first century, which is when Stephen was executed, to the second, even until the 3rd century, persecution was intermittent. It was on and it was off, depending on who the emperor was at that particular time. But despite the fact that there was 10 major persecutions throughout the first 3 centuries of Rome, there's a theme between them all. There's a common theme that can be drawn between even the persecution of Stephen and the latest persecution that we can have. And that was, first of all, the unwillingness of the martyrs to deny their faith. Secondly, it was intermittent persecution. It was not on and off. I think that's a stereotype that we have. I never really understood that until studying this and researching this. But thirdly, it was wrongful accusation against Christians. Christians, even then, were wrongfully accused of things. We are today, too. But even then, Christians were wrongfully accused. They were, first of all, accused of being atheists. This is not meaning that they didn't have a belief. It was just they were accused of being atheists because they didn't have a belief in the gods of the Roman Empire at that time. So people labeled them as atheists. Secondly, they were accused of incest. Now, you may be thinking, what does that mean? But if we see throughout Paul's letters, throughout the epistles, and throughout the New Testament, we see that he instructed them to greet each other with a hug and a holy kiss. And they called everyone brother and sister. So this led to a stereotype among Christians that they were brothers and sisters that were incest. And thirdly, cannibalism. Now that may sound a little crazy too, but this happened because Christians were at this time the Lord's Supper was a holy sanctified event, and so Jesus said, "This blood, this wine is my blood, and this bread is my body broken for you." And so the Romans took that literally. They thought it was known as transubstantiation. They thought that it was literally his blood and his. They thought they were literally eating Jesus' blood and his body. But you may be thinking, how does this apply? Still, you may be thinking, how does this apply to me today? I think this applies because this problem throughout time is not past tense. The persecution of Christians is not solely past tense. In the fact that it's still a relevant problem today. So, a common theme that's been throughout time is that Christians have been persecuted. Christians are the most persecuted religion in the world today. On average, this is from the Open Doors USA. It was a study conducted by the ERLC, which is a branch of the Southern Baptist Convention. Study was conducted just a year or 2 years ago. It says an average of at least 180 Christians around the world are killed each month for their faith. Secondly, Christians are persecuted virtually worldwide. Christians in more than 60 countries face persecution from their governments and surrounding neighbors simply because of their belief in Christ. And thirdly, North Korea is among the worst countries today for persecution. Anywhere you go in North Korea, aside from a few areas, Christians face persecution for their faith. And fourth, in 92% of the countries that do not allow Christian belief in any extent, 92% of these are persecuted by Islamic extremists. So there's the facts. But we have to go a little deeper than the facts, I would argue. See, the dilemma of Christian persecution has not only surfaced as a problem both past and present, it should simultaneously call us to action. It should instill in us a knowledge of the history of the persecution of the church. Secondly, it should allow us to appreciate the opportunity that we've been given to worship and believe as we choose. And thirdly, it should allow us to evaluate and analyze our own faith. Thank you.